What if I told you that a 28-year-old trader single-handedly destroyed a 233-year-old bank that had financed the Louisiana Purchase and managed the Queen of England's money? And he did it in just 3 years, using a secret account that nobody knew existed. This is the absolutely shocking true story of Nick Leeson, the rogue trader who brought down Barings Bank and changed financial regulation forever. Our story begins on February 25, 1967, in Watford, Hertfordshire, England. Nicholas William Leeson was born into a working-class family. His father was a self-employed plasterer and his mother was a nurse. Nick grew up in ordinary circumstances. He wasn't born into privilege or wealth. He attended Parmiter School in nearby Garston and finished sixth form in 1985 with 6.0 levels and 2A level passes. Nothing spectacular. Just an average student from an average background. After finishing school, Nick didn't go to university. Instead, in 1985, he got a job as a clerk at Coutts Bank, a prestigious private bank on Lombard Street in London. His job was simple and boring. He settled paper checks, crediting and debiting client accounts. It was back office work. Nothing glamorous. But Nick was learning how banks operated from the inside. He was learning about systems, about processes, about how money moved through financial institutions. In 1987, Nick made his first career move. He left Coutts for Morgan Stanley, one of the most prestigious investment banks in the world. But again, he was in the back office. He worked in their futures and options department, clearing and settling listed derivatives transactions. Nick was smart and hardworking, but without a university degree, he knew his chances of getting a front office trading role at Morgan Stanley were slim. So in 1989, he made another move. He joined Barings Bank. Now let's talk about Barings Bank for a moment because this was no ordinary institution. Barings was founded in 1762 by Francis Baring, making it Britain's oldest merchant bank. For over 2 centuries, Barings had been at the center of global finance. They helped Thomas Jefferson finance the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. They managed the finances of the British royal family for generations. Even Queen Elizabeth II had an account with Barings. This was an institution steeped in history, prestige, and tradition. Nick started at Barings earning just £12,000 per year. That's about £42,000 in today's money. He was still in back office operations, but he had a plan. He was going to prove his worth. And his first opportunity came quickly. Barings sent Nick and 4 other settlement specialists to Jakarta, Indonesia, to troubleshoot a massive back office mess. The Jakarta office held £100 million worth of stock certificates and bearer bonds that were in deliverable form. Clients who had purchased these stocks were refusing to take delivery because the market had declined. They complained about everything: wrong denominations, improper documentation, unacceptable physical condition. It was a nightmare. But Nick spent 10 months methodically working through every single certificate, addressing every problem, making deliveries happen. He was brilliant at it. By the time he finished, Barings management saw him as a problem solver, someone who could handle complex operational challenges, someone they could trust. In April 1992, Barings decided to open a futures and options office in Singapore to execute and clear transactions on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, known as SIMEX. They needed someone to set it up and run it. And they chose Nick Leeson. At 25 years old, Nick was appointed General Manager of Barings Futures Singapore. This was his big break. He was going to run both the front office trading operations and the back office settlement operations. In any normal financial institution, this would never be allowed. It's a massive conflict of interest. The people who trade should never be the same people who settle and record those trades. But Barings management didn't seem to notice or care. Before Nick left for Singapore, something important happened that should have stopped everything. Nick applied for a broker's license in the United Kingdom and was denied. Why? Because he had committed fraud on his application by failing to report a judgment for debt against him from National Westminster Bank. This should have been a huge red flag. But neither Nick nor Barings disclosed this denial when he applied for his license in Singapore. Somehow, he got approved. Nick arrived in Singapore in April 1992 and immediately started hiring staff. But here's the problem. Barings told him to keep costs low. So Nick hired young, inexperienced people. In July 1992, he passed the SIME 10 trading exam, which allowed him to trade on the exchange floor. Nick's official job was to perform arbitrage trading. This means buying Nikkei 225 futures contracts on one exchange and simultaneously selling them on another exchange to profit from small price differences. It's considered a low-risk strategy that generates small, steady profits. But Nick had other plans. Now here's where everything started to go wrong. On July 3, 1992, just 3 months after arriving in Singapore, Nick opened an error account numbered 88,888. The number 8 is considered lucky in Chinese culture, which is why he chose 5 8s. This account was supposed to be used to track small trading mistakes made by inexperienced staff members. Every trading desk has error accounts. They're normal. They're necessary. But Nick was going to use this account for something very different. According to Nick's later testimony, the account was first used in July 1992 when one of his subordinates made a mistake. The employee was supposed to buy 20 futures contracts for Fuji Bank but accidentally sold them instead. This error cost Barings £20,000. Nick didn't want to look bad to his superiors in London. He didn't want them to think he couldn't manage his team. So instead of reporting the loss, he hid it in account 88,888. And that's when everything started to spiral. But here's the thing. Nick didn't just hide that one mistake and move on. He kept using the account. He started making his own unauthorized speculative trades. And when those trades lost money, he would hide the losses in account 88,888. He was gambling with the bank's money. By the end of September 1992, just 2 months after opening the error account, Nick had accumulated losses of about £6 million in account 88,888. £6 million in 2 months. And nobody at Barings knew about it. Meanwhile, Nick was reporting huge profits in his official trading accounts. In 1992, he reported profits of £10 million to Barings London, which accounted for 10% of the bank's entire annual profit. 10% of a 233-year-old bank's profit was supposedly coming from a 25-year-old trader in Singapore who had only been there for 8 months. Barings management was thrilled. At the end of 1992, Nick received a bonus of £130,000 on top of his £50,000 salary. He was making more than twice his annual salary in bonuses. Nick and his wife Lisa, whom he had married in March 1992, were living the high life in Singapore. They had a beautiful apartment, expensive cars, lavish dinners. Nick was being celebrated as a trading genius. But the truth was hidden in account 88,888. By the end of 1992, the error account contained £2 million in real losses. In June 1993, things got even worse for oversight. Barings appointed Nick as head of derivatives trading in Singapore, while also keeping him in charge of settlement operations. Now he was both the trader and the person checking his own work. He could trade, record his own trades, and report his own results. No separation of duties, no checks and balances. It was a compliance disaster waiting to happen. Nick kept gambling. He developed what he later called a doubling strategy. Every time he lost money, he would double his bet to try to recover the losses. Sometimes this strategy worked. In 1993, he managed to recover a £6 million negative balance in the error account. After that successful recovery, he vowed never to use the account again. But he couldn't stop. By late 1993, the losses in account 88,888 had grown to £23 million. In July 1994, Barings conducted an internal audit of the Singapore office. The audit report, which was circulated to senior management in London, clearly stated that the Singapore operation was exposed to great risks because Nick Leeson was in charge of both trading and settlement. The auditors recommended separating these duties immediately, but Barings management chose to do nothing. Why? Because Nick was their star trader. He was generating massive profits. Or so they thought. By the end of 1994, the hidden losses in account 88,888 had exploded to £208 million. That's almost half of Barings' entire capital. And still, nobody knew. How was Nick hiding such massive losses? He was manipulating the accounting records in multiple ways. First, he would initially book losing trades in the official accounts of other Barings entities, then transfer them to account 88,888 through what he called transfer trades. He would adjust the prices of these transfers to make the official accounts look profitable, while dumping all the losses into the secret account. Second, he would create completely fictitious trades between different accounts to hide unhedged positions. Third, whenever he needed more cash to cover margin calls from SIMEX, he would fabricate cover stories and even forge documents to convince London to send more money. In January 1995, an auditor found a discrepancy in Nick's accounting. But Nick manufactured a fake payment receipt and concocted a story about a paper trade between two clients. The auditor believed him. Also in January, SIMEX itself became concerned about the large volume of Nick's trading in Nikkei futures and options. They contacted Barings to ask if the bank had sufficient assets to back all these trades. Barings' senior management assured SIME that everything was fine and they had plenty of capital. They had no idea what was really happening. By mid-January 1995, Nick had accumulated £208 million in losses, but he believed he could recover everything with one big bet. On January 16, 1995, Nick went all in. He bet everything that the Nikkei index would not fall below 19,000 points. He was selling options and taking huge long positions in Nikkei futures. If the market stayed stable or went up, he would make enormous profits and cover all his losses. But if the market crashed, he would lose everything. The next day, January 17, 1995, at 5:46 in the morning, a massive earthquake struck Kobe, Japan. It measured 7.3 on the Richter scale. Over 6,000 people died. The earthquake caused $100 billion in damage, and it sent the Japanese stock market into a tailspin. The Nikkei index plunged. On January 23rd, it dropped to 17,785 points, well below Nick's 19,000-point threshold. Nick's positions were underwater by hundreds of millions of pounds. But Nick didn't stop. He doubled down. He kept buying more futures contracts, desperately hoping the market would bounce back. Over 3 months, he bought more than 20,000 futures contracts, each worth $180,000. He was trying to move the entire market by sheer force of buying, but it didn't work. The market kept falling. By February 23, 1995, the Nikkei had dropped to 17,580 points. The losses had reached $1.4 billion. On February 23rd, Nick knew it was over. He couldn't hide it anymore. He left a note on his desk that read simply, "I'm sorry." Then, he and his wife, Lisa, fled Singapore on a plane to Kuala Lumpur. Meanwhile, back at the Singapore office, a senior settlements clerk who had been sent from London discovered account 88,888. When Barings management saw the losses, they were horrified. They contacted the Bank of England immediately. Barings tried to arrange a bailout. They contacted other banks, the Bank of England, anyone who might help. But the losses were too large. On February 26, 1995, just 3 days after Nick fled, Barings Bank was declared insolvent. A 233-year-old institution that had survived wars, depressions, and financial crises was destroyed in less than a week. The bank was eventually sold to Dutch banking group 1NG for the symbolic price of £1. Just £1 for a bank that had once been worth hundreds of millions. Nick and Lisa fled from Malaysia to Thailand to Germany. On March 2, 1995, Nick was arrested at Frankfurt Airport. He spent months fighting extradition, but eventually, on November 20, 1995, he was extradited to Singapore. On December 1, 1995, Nick pleaded guilty to 2 counts of deceiving the bank's auditors and cheating SIMEX, including forging documents. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in Singapore's Changi prison. In prison, Nick was diagnosed with colon cancer. His weight plummeted and most of his hair fell out from chemotherapy. His wife Lisa got a job as a flight attendant so she could visit him regularly, but the strain was too much. She divorced him in 1997. Nick was released in July 1999 after serving 4 years and 4 months for good behavior. Against all odds, he survived the cancer. After his release, Nick rebuilt his life. In 1996, while still in prison, he published an autobiography called Rogue Trader, which detailed everything that happened. The book became a bestseller. In 1999, it was made into a film starring Ewan McGregor as Nick. In 2003, Nick remarried to an Irish beautician named Leona Tormé. He now works as a business speaker and consultant, talking about risk management, compliance, corporate governance, and mental health. As of 2024, his net worth is estimated at $3 million. So what can we learn from this absolutely crazy story? First, no amount of profit justifies ignoring red flags. Nick was denied a broker's license for fraud. That should have ended his career right there. Second, separation of duties is absolutely critical in finance. Nick was both trader and settlement officer. That's like letting someone write checks and balance the checkbook. It's asking for disaster. Third, pride and fear are a dangerous combination. Nick later said he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to admit his mistakes. He said, "I wanted to shout from the rooftops that there are massive losses. I want to stop. But for some reason, I was unable to do it. I had this catastrophic secret burning inside me, yet I simply couldn't open my mouth." Fourth, doubling down on losses rarely works. Nick's strategy of betting more to recover losses is how gamblers go bankrupt. It's not investing. It's desperation. And finally, even the most prestigious institutions can fall. Barings Bank survived 233 years, financed nations, and served royalty. But poor risk management and lack of oversight destroyed it in 3 years. No company is too big or too old to fail. The collapse of Barings Bank led to major changes in financial regulation. Singapore amended its Futures Trading Act to enable closer monitoring of traders. Licensing requirements became stricter. Banks around the world implemented better internal controls and separation of duties. Technology now allows firms to monitor trading activity in real time with automated alerts for unusual behavior. Nick Leeson's disaster became a case study taught in every business school about what not to do. Nick himself has said that the holes in the banking system haven't really been closed. He believes banks are still too focused on making money rather than protecting it. And he's not entirely wrong. Since Barings, we've seen other rogue traders like Jerome Kervill, who lost over $7 billion, and Kweku Adebole, who lost $2.3 billion. The lesson of Nick Leeson hasn't been fully learned. If this story shocked you, make sure you're subscribed because we cover wild true stories like this every week. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Should Nick have received a longer sentence? Was Barings management equally to blame? Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. And remember, in finance, there's no such thing as a sure thing. And when someone claims they are making guaranteed profits with no risk, run the other way.